If you're new to our channel, we'd love to have you join our little community. Just hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. We promise it will be worth your while.
It took 3 months, but eventually Brent Jones was released from the hospital. His reception at home was large. All of the kids wanted to be there to see him for the first time and help Sarah change him and feed him. He was on the small side and underweight, but his breathing was normal and he was healthy. He immediately chose Deborah as his favorite person among the crowd of family members, bringing out jokes about Deborah's maternal instincts and abilities. Sarah quietly whispered, he must know how much she wanted to help him from how much we talked about her before he was born, to Olivia, who grinned in agreement. Marcus Sylvester had no ill effects from being slightly premature either. He gained weight fast and had a healthy set of lungs that let the neighborhood know he was awake. Conveniently, just before it was time for the teens to get up for school, thankfully for his parents, he realized who his favorites were and insisted on Iris, Rachel, and Sam giving him constant attention whenever they were home, allowing Leslie a chance to relax and catch up on sleep. He also carried on the family tradition of ignoring John whenever possible, getting Karen and Leslie to snicker every time any of the 3 girls were seen with him by John. Deborah got a workout, as the 2 babies kept her on her toes as she babysat so the new parents could enjoy some nights off. She was a natural at being a mother to them. The jokes about her were true, as her instincts were dead-end regarding when diaper changes would be needed and when they would want food so much that Sarah was honestly jealous of her abilities. Even though Deborah could never give Patrick a child, she could at least share her love with others. In a few years, when she had graduated and had a stable job, she would happily adopt a child, so some deserving kid could have a loving mother and father. Their primary hope was to find a child who was like Deborah and help him or her become the boy or girl they needed to be. It might not happen, and the 2 might have to settle for adopting a regular kid, but their families knew where their hearts lay. Neil and Faith enjoyed their time with Deborah before they left for England and after they returned. She became a fixture at the school up until she left for her trip to California for her surgery a few weeks later. When she returned after her 6-week trip, it was as if she had never left. Deborah eventually added watching Junior Kelly to her babysitting duties. His father had to help cover some events in neighboring cities that spring, which often required him to be unable to pick his son up. Junior was always on his best behavior and would be a great influence on Neil, as the latter took his cues from Junior just as Faith took hers from Daisy. William was impressed with Deborah's ability to make Junior focus on homework. Thanks to her involvement, Junior's grades improved, prompting Mr. King, his and Neil's teacher, to promise to give her a good word with whatever school district she chose to apply to when she finished her degree. While Deborah had established her new life with Patrick and things were looking great for her, life wasn't good for her relatives. Deborah's uncles each chose to accept plea bargains to avoid long prison sentences. This was contingent upon testifying against their parents, and the doctor out in California for criminal conspiracy charges leveled against the trio, done so through CCTV feed from their jail. The 2 stopped by Neil. Faith and Avery would spend the next 25 years in prison for assault, attempted kidnapping, and criminal conspiracy, as well possession of a dangerous weapon. Her uncle, that actually kidnapped her, received 50 years in prison for his crimes, but thankfully for him, the federal government chose not to try him for multiple federal crimes and let the state get at him for the tougher, convictable crimes instead. Given his age, it was essentially a life sentence. Soon after Deborah had confirmed her surgical appointment, Deborah's other family members received their restraining orders and didn't bother testing them. Word reached them through their incarcerated relatives that Deborah was untouchable, thanks to knowing the right people and having friends in high places. the family imploded over the constant bickering, with several of Deborah's cousins finally moving elsewhere with two, the ones who never harmed nor harassed Deborah and were friendly towards Raina, moving to Massachusetts to reestablish their lives after graduating from high school a few months early due to pressure from the Caplins to stop hindering their education. Dorothy helped them get started by giving them a home to stay in and kept an eye on them to keep them out of trouble. She showed them love and affection that their parents never showed them, winning them over as they quickly let the past go and realized that all of the tales told about Dorothy were utter garbage. Dorothy was the exact opposite of everyone else in their family, and they quickly saw that she was what a mother should be. They were serious about changing their lives and worked hard at finding jobs, with Dorothy getting them to go to college for degrees. They were introduced to Deborah and Patrick officially after her return form surgery, and neither could believe their eyes. They could not believe that she had become such a beauty and warmly accepted her for who she was. Deborah, in turn, introduced them to Raina, who received the same reception and put to rest the past. Deborah's grandparents were tried and convicted for their roles in Deborah's kidnapping and the other crimes that could be proven. Justice was swift and harsh towards them. Given that they were already out on bail, they were immediately put into isolation and unable to communicate to coordinate among the family members, so they couldn't threaten their remaining children to get them to do something. Both were tried for multiple conspiracy charges, as well as witness intimidation and extortion charges, as alongside the abuse charges, for what they did to Deborah prior to her turning 18. Their constant ranting about Deborah and outbursts in court led them to being forced to watch their own trial from a separate room, and upon hearing the full history of Deborah, the jury wasted little time in convicting both of them for their crimes. They were sentenced to a total of 30 years in prison, which, for the elderly couple, all but meant the rest of their lives. As if going to prison for the rest of their natural lives wasn't bad enough, none of their children were allowed to visit, as they too were arrested for their roles in abusing Deborah, as well as charges of witness intimidation, when the truth about what they did to keep the abuse against Deborah from being reported by her schools was revealed. Several of her uncles went so far as to visit her old teachers and threaten them in front of witnesses to keep their mouths shut, prompting separate assault charges to be filed, leading to more convictions. They got off easy with suspended sentences for the crimes against Deborah and served short jail terms for the assault charges, but the criminal convictions still stung them deeply and cost several their jobs. The Vegas who remained in the law area were in serious trouble with the law over taxes and fees that the family neglected to pay on their homes. The main family house was lost to the bank, and the family members who stayed there were forced to split up and fend for themselves. The house didn't remain vacant. The new owner opened it up to families in need that had nowhere else to go and named the home Jamie's Place. The identity of the new owner was a tightly held secret, with only a small number of people knowing the truth about it. The home was owned by a group: Deborah, Jamie, Kylie, Pena, Al, and Raina. They hired someone to maintain the home and oversee the operations, insisting that it be run by someone like them, but only after a thorough screening. It thrived and served multiple families the first summer, helping them in a rough situation and turning around their lives. Lucius long recovered from his broken arm, leg and jaw and orchectomy surgeries, but was utterly humiliated in prison for his eunuch state. The man whose daughter he verbally assaulted had friends who were prison guards, and they made his life a living hell every chance they got. He endured constant taunting and learned quickly that he was an absolute nobody, and his connections to important people was just a load of hot air now that he was divorced from Ruth. He was tried and convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and several counts of assault and battery. To the shock of his lawyers, his marriage was terminated immediately after the official paperwork was filed before the probate court by the judge. Once the news about the assault on Deborah, his long-standing proven infidelity that dated back to before he married Ruth, and the amount of money that he stole from his wife was presented to him. The judge practically laughed when Lucius's lawyer tried to demand that Ruth pay for his services and complained about breaking their prenuptial agreement. In reality, Lucius had broken the agreement himself with his continued infidelity. He didn't get a penny from his wife, thanks to carefully worded parts that Paul insisted be added to the agreement, just in case he tried something similar to what he had done to Ruth. His fling cost him everything, like the custody agreement with Sheila and Deborah. He never bothered to read the agreement before he signed it. The humiliation was added on top of the poison pill provision in the custody agreement with Sheila and Deborah that Valerie strictly and ruthlessly enforced, leaving him penniless from that end. The final and most humiliating thing was his daughter and ex-wife changing their last names from Long to James to reflect his excising from the family permanently. With Christian and Paul's blessing, and without a fight from their lawyers, Deborah handed over control of the company to some close friends of Quentin Nelson who had been in the industry and needed a job and had a strong resume to support their hiring. Under their leadership, the company quickly invested in new equipment and software, which in turn turned the company around and started to thrive, as their work was miles ahead of what Lucius was producing and equal to or better than competitors, and at a price that was lower than what was being offered, giving them a strong start. Ruth saw a diamond in the rough and decided to invest in the company after she had been repaid by the company what her husband had stolen from her. She stayed on as a third silent partner and member of the board of directors alongside her brother and father. It would now sink or swim with them. She got what she needed out of it, so anything else was just money in the bank. Sheila moved in with Avery and Ruth immediately after the wedding. Avery loved having her as a sister, and the two were inseparable whenever Sheila wasn't working. Ruth grew to love having Sheila in the house and spent a lot of time talking with her, as well as the invigorated Avery. She could appreciate the two becoming close and having one another to go to with their problems. She enjoyed playing the role of mother to her new daughter after having missed so much of Avery's young life, portraying the loving and devoted wife at so many functions at the behest of Lucius. Sheila, in turn, was happy to be loved by someone again and burst into tears the first time she realized that she had called Ruth Mom unprompted. Sheila and Ian Bailey grew close and dated throughout the spring. The two didn't get too serious too soon, letting friendship bloom before taking things beyond simple hugging and occasional makeout sessions in the movie theater. Ian and Avery played off one another at times with Ian, enjoying the role in Avery's antics, letting her know that he cared about her deeply and appreciated the sibling fun. Avery and Raoul's relationship bloomed, as well as Thomas and Rebecca were great mentors for the younger couple. Thomas had been treating Raoul as one of the guys since December, but Rebecca started to treat Avery the same way with the girls. The couple eventually joined Jesse and Reed, Iris and Sam, and Francesca and Donald in their dates, and after 2 months, were allowed to go out on their own. Sheila was given a couple of days off the weekend of the start of April vacation. Avery, Sheila, and Ruth used that opportunity to travel to Florida to visit the elderly Mrs. Long. Sadly, Deborah was unable to go as she was still recovering from her surgery, but insisted that it wouldn't be right for her to be there after what happened to Mrs. Long's son. Mrs. Long happily told Ruth that she was right in not wanting to disturb the moment and did not blame Deborah at all for any of what happened to Lucius. Avery knew this trip was a dying request and could see that the woman wasn't going to last long after they left. It was her last chance to see her paternal grandmother before she died. Mrs. Long took one look at Avery and cried, telling Ruth she is the spitting image of you, and the more she fills out, the more she becomes a mirror image of you. Lucius couldn't accept that she favored you genetically, and in reality it's his own fault for not having someone who looks like him. Could have had another child, but his own greed and vanity put off that chance. Given how he was with women, he probably has a son somewhere but won't find out due to his actions. I am just glad that you were able to have Avery. You have a piece of you that will live on for years to come. Turning to Sheila, she smiled as she told her, "You have done wonders for my granddaughter, and I am forever grateful that she finally has the sibling she deserved. I am saddened that I won't be around for very long, but I know she will be in good hands. I hope that you keep a close eye on her and ensure she studies hard and makes her mark on the world." Ruth shed a tear as she realized what she meant. It was worse than anyone thought. That night, the trio received the news that Mrs. Long had passed away in her sleep. Arrangements had been made for her to be transferred to Boston for burial close to her daughter, in-law and granddaughter, so the trio simply ensured that they were followed. Tearfully, the 10 members of the James family said their goodbye to Mrs. Long in a small ceremony 5 days later, with Avery tearfully tossing flowers at the casket as it was lowered. Her last words to her grandmother was, "I'll do what you said." Paul and Alexandra were frequent visitors to Winnisimmett now that they didn't have to deal with the constant annoyances and bickering that often came when dealing with Lucius. Paul saw the little girl he always considered his niece come out in Sheila and saw the brightness in Avery, making him grow a bit misty-eyed over missing all that time with Sheila. Alexandra enjoyed having someone to spoil who appreciated the affection she was giving. She too grew close to Sheila and saw her as the niece that she was supposed to have been. Isabel, Selah, and Zoe would try to spend as many weekends in the city as possible at their aunt's house. They befriended Paige and Hannah as well as the Finn girls during their frequent visits. The trio were going to go to Salem State alongside Hannah and Paige, making things extremely interesting that spring as the governor would join them on their visits to the campus. Their relationship to him was kept secret until all three were accepted, so his visit was completely out of the blue and a shock to the school, and their acceptances not seen as favoritism towards relatives of the governor. Interestingly enough, it was the attempt to keep the relationship of Christian to the girls a secret that uncovered shocking truths about some of the students. Many prominent politicians had their children in state schools, with several, including the girls responsible for harassing and tormenting Deborah, being given slots in the school despite not meeting the most basic of criteria for admission. Christian's own reaction to the news was swift, as he had those who were still in the school suspended by the school until further notice and told that they had to show that they were qualified to attend before being allowed to return. There were several who did pass the requirements, but multiple students failed their requirements completely after the revelation and subsequent testing. Salem State saw a major change once the lieutenant governor and his friends and allies were removed from power. The old regime was completely excised, the new one chosen from among qualified personnel who were intentionally kept out of the job in favor of cronyism and nepotism. Several of those in power who were innocent were given promotions at other schools as part of the state's big crackdown on cronyism and nepotism. Initially, it was seen as an insult to them and guilt by association until private meetings with members of Christian staff showed that they were, in fact, on the fast track to higher positions, including running some of the colleges and universities, the outrage turned quickly to relief, and thanks with Christian, taking no offense in their justified reactions. It was reasonable. Anyone else would do the same. Dean Zane was among those who had been offended by the supposed guilt by association. He actually got promoted to the job of chancellor of the school, taking over running the whole university after improving his department, then his college more than any other during his tenure. As dean, he was the one that the previous chancellor wanted to take over, but was held down thanks to the powers that be. Now among the excised personnel, Dean Zane was quick to thank John and the students for the job and stated that he would stand in their corner and protect their rights, immediately winning over the students and alumni. Multiple professors saw their contracts terminated for their outspoken remarks in class about Deborah and transgender students as a whole. Their positions were quickly filled by associate professors who had resumes that were equally as good, if not better, than their predecessors, so it was a net improvement for the university. These were also some of the most popular professors on campus, so news of their promotions caused students to celebrate. These professors themselves added people they knew and trusted to teach courses in their departments alongside them, helping to bring up the overall quality of the education well above other universities in the region. Those involved in the revealing of Deborah's personal information received hefty fines and short jail terms after a deep investigation into the school's records department. There were 3 employed at the university that were directly involved and 2 who passed along the information, knowing it was illegal to divulge. They all pleaded that they did no wrong, but it was revealed that Deborah wasn't the only victim of them, with several other students coming forward to show that they had been blackmailed by other students regarding leaked personal information, so their punishments were stiff. The 3 girls who caused Deborah so much grief were completely expelled from the university, with no chance of reapplying to any state or private school. Their criminal actions led to several weeks in jail and criminal records, and humiliation for their families, to the point that one family up and moved to another state to avoid the backlash. The one that was caught in Deborah's room partying received 4 years in prison for assaulting a police officer and was fined several $1,000s. She was adamant that she was innocent. But when the video of her trying to go after David was played, she tried to claim that she was under the influence, which was proven to be false. The judge took little pity as he sentenced her. He ignored the veiled threats by her father, who was told, "Your threats are on record, and any action taken against me will be a matter of public record and will be used against you in a court of law. Be glad that I am not placing you under arrest for said threats. But what I do is nothing compared with what your colleagues will do to you." The man quickly resigned from office and disowned his daughter, but the damage was done. He had to flee the state to Florida to escape the media scrutiny regarding his threats and left his daughter to fend for herself. He found little support down south and was humiliated by neighbors when his past was shown for all to see. The lieutenant governor was tried and convicted of threatening a public official, attempted extortion, and disseminating private information obtained illegally. He was quickly sentenced to 4 years in state prison for all 3 of his crimes. He vowed revenge, but it only made him look worse in the eyes of the public, as his threats were aired nationally, further damaging him. After the conviction was announced, the long-awaited articles of impeachment were brought forth by the General Court, with both houses in session in their respective chambers. He was impeached in an overwhelming majority by the House of Representatives, then removed from office by the Senate. At his defense before the full Senate, he was defiant until the end, but the evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable, especially as he was in shackles and had several state troopers around him as he made his case before them. Not one of the present senators voted to acquit him of the charges. The media were vicious in attacking him and anyone who supported him. The few politicians brave enough to defend him were found to have been paid by him to do so through campaign donations and bribes. They didn't last long in the legislature and quickly resigned when it was revealed that they had pending indictments in federal courts. The feds were quick to go after them, and within a year, roughly 20 legislators had been forced to resign or state that they would not seek another term in office. Joe and Phyllis worked hard for Deborah and got her the full amounts they sought in their lawsuits. Deborah's rights were found to be violated by the state from the get-go, and her case, reviewed by an independent panel, with the full report showing that her family influenced people to get her removed from Jamie and Dorothy's care without justification or any chance to fight back. The judge who ordered the actual removal of custody was called before the California Assembly to answer the charges of what amounted to abusing his power to enable a kidnapping. The investigations into Deborah's care uncovered dozens of instances of him blocking investigations and threatening people who tried to investigate other similar cases of abuse against a transgender child, or that involved a child of a transgender parent. He was adamant that he had done no wrong and that James should not have been raised by a deviant freak. His harsh words about her and Jamie brought shouts of outrage from the assembly and led to an overwhelming majority in favor of his removal. He was also stripped of his license to practice law and fined thousands of dollars, all of which were paid in restitution to Deborah. Social services were publicly humiliated when the media caught wind that they had allowed a child to be removed from the home of a couple because one parent was transgender and did nothing to follow up on checking up on the child. They then went after them again when news that they never followed up on allegations of physical abuse and neglect against a transgender child who subsequently was mutilated by her family. The firestorm that surrounded the case led to the dismissal of several administrators who were found to have blocked similar investigations and who were critical of LGBT children and parents. The doctor who treated Deborah was found to have been lacking in psychological and psychiatric credentials, and the medical actions taken against Deborah were akin to mutilation and medical abuse. The doctor forged his credentials and, in fact, lied to both the hospital that he worked out of and the DA who controlled the prescriptions that he was using to treat his patients. In essence, he was drugging patients without the right to do so. An investigation into his work history showed that he had forcibly drugged and assaulted dozens of children and adults who were supposed to be in his care over the years. At least 4 patients were revealed to have undergone similar kidnapping and forced hospitalizations by the doctor. All 4 of the patients were like Deborah, with one finally killing herself when the doctor told her she was never going to get out until she stopped trying to be a female. The DA were swift to go after him after Deborah's kidnapping made them aware of his actions, and the investigation showed that his actions resulted in the death of someone supposedly under his care. The agents raided his office and found correspondence with several drug companies helping him get around the DA regulations and helping to fudge his background to prevent anyone from looking into his past too deeply. They hit pay dirt with the doctor, but finding the correspondence was a bigger boon than they had ever hoped for. They had found a way of finally going after a company that they knew to be dirty, and the agency would shut them down heavily and hard, with a DEE essentially making his life a living hell. His practice was shut down pending legal action against him by the state medical board, as well as by the criminal justice system. His insurance covered the full amount that was being sought, but Joe and Phyllis sought restitution from the doctor, leading to him becoming financially bankrupt to go along with being morally and ethically. The insurance company would then go after him for fraud as they tried to seek restitution for his lies and leave them open to future lawsuits. The doctor ended up proclaiming his innocence and refusing to take any sort of plea bargain. He stood trial and lost badly. Dozens of patients came forward with allegations of abuse, most of whom had the supporting evidence showing that he was physically abusive. The part with him castrating Deborah because she refused to stop being transgender caused several members of the jury to become visibly sickened and ensured that he wouldn't leave the courtroom a free man. In mid-March, Deborah had her surgery and spent the next 6 weeks recovering. She followed the doctor's orders and did some light walking, then swimming while there. Patrick was by her side 24/7 and wouldn't let her out of his sight until she was strong enough to be able to swim on her own. Miguel paid her a visit, and like so many others nearly fainted at the sight of the beautiful woman that he saw before him. He hugged her tight, telling her how he could never repay her for all of the love and support that she gave Reina when she was her neighbor. The two became close to Miguel, with Patrick acting more like a younger brother to Miguel to Deborah's little sister. Reina and Lupe visited during April vacation and acted as nurses, allowing Patrick to get out for some much-needed rest. Reina enjoyed playing the role and would work with Deborah through the rough spots and bits of depression that came with the final surgery. Lupe was the ever-present mother to them, and let the two enjoy their time together, often spending her time teasing Patrick over Deborah's motherly behavior and dropping hints that maybe he should look into becoming a dad in the future. He took it in stride, knowing that she was working off her own nervous energy as she saw the little girl blossom into the woman she saw before her, with Reina blooming into the same young woman alongside her. While Lupe and Reina were there, Deborah heard from the university, with them begging her to return as a student. They would give her free tuition and fees up to and including earning her PhD. She agreed to do it, but only if they ensured that no woman or man in her position had their rights violated in such a way again. After days of careful deliberation with Reina and Lupe, Deborah eventually felt that she had to return, if only to show that she would not let abuse keep her down. She had a solid reason to return. She had 5 people who wanted her there, and they would not let anyone harm Deborah again. Deborah released the scholarship to another deserving student, this time being part of the group who chose the person to receive it. She chose a young woman who was like her in that she had a horrible family, but who wasn't transgendered. She needed to escape her pitiful existence of abuse and neglect, and to Deborah's delight, Joseph and Evelyn agreed with her. Deborah was asked to go with them to meet the young woman. Going to the home was a bit of an eye-opener, and meeting with her parents was worse. The 3 laid out the scholarship terms, which the young woman accepted without even reading. Her justification was simple. It was to accept whatever was given to her and escape or remain there. She agreed to anything so long as it got her away. The two hit it off, and Deborah found herself mentoring the young woman immediately. When she introduced her to the 3 James girls, things turned better than she could have hoped. Isabel, Selah, and Zoe took her under their wing, and the 4 became inseparable as they ensured the young woman settled in nicely and had friends to help her out. Deborah's hard-won riches. But that didn't change her. Neither did finally become whole. What did change her was having Patrick by her side and a loving family behind her. She had her mother to guide her, and she had a lifelong friend who she proudly calls her sister. She could never be happier finding a life after being lost for so long.